This raid did not take place in a remote location. It happened in Los Angeles, in the middle of one of the largest urban areas in the United States. A massive, carefully planned, and surgically executed raid proved that cartel networks hiding in plain sight are not untouchable. It showed that dismantling them requires a blueprint that blends intelligence, financial targeting, community trust, and environmental awareness. This operation is a model for the future. Cartels have long infiltrated U.S. cities. They do not storm in. They seep into neighborhoods, conceal themselves in small businesses, and mask their operations as everyday commerce. Their networks are invisible until exposed. The Los Angeles operation broke through this invisibility, showing how layered, resilient, and dangerous these networks are. It also showed how they can be dismantled. The raid was a decisive strike against a network that had embedded itself in American residential zones. It was not a small bust or an isolated lab, but a sprawling, coordinated infiltration of international narcotics networks. The operations were centered on Mexican cartels. Their strategy was sophisticated. Embed production and distribution directly into Los Angeles, planting roots inside the U.S. They chose Los Angeles because of its international connectivity, large residential areas, and complex economic networks that allowed illicit activities to hide in plain sight. This case is one of the clearest examples of how far international networks will go to penetrate American society. The operations took place inside typical suburban homes and warehouses that looked like thousands of others. These were not fortified compounds in deserts. They were residential houses with trimmed lawns and mailboxes. Behind closed doors, narcotics labs operated using precursor chemicals smuggled from Asia and Mexico. This calculated decision to use suburban areas shows how deeply these networks have studied American society, blending into communities to avoid suspicion. The supply chains were global. Precursor chemicals moved from factories in Asia, through ports in Mexico, and across borders into the U.S. Once inside, they were used for production and packaging in Los Angeles neighborhoods. This model is chilling in its efficiency, showing that international crime is about merging global supply chains with local communities. Financially, the operations went beyond narcotics. Cartels tied their money laundering networks directly into legitimate businesses downtown, such as restaurants, shops, and import-export companies. To the average resident, these businesses looked normal, but they were funneling illicit proceeds back into the global criminal economy. This shows how cartel economics infect local economies. The boundaries between legitimate and illicit blurred, entangling communities.
Before we get to that, I need your help. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help. So I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe and help me out.
Perhaps the most unsettling part is the human factor. Cartel members did not just hide in safe houses. They lived double lives, coaching children's sports, shopping at local stores, and creating cover identities. They manipulated local environments and exploited the trust and anonymity of suburban life. This is infiltration in the literal sense, neighbors unknowingly living next to global crime operatives. The hazards extended to public health and safety. The clandestine labs produced toxic waste, often dumped into drains, yards, or trash. The chemicals can cause respiratory problems, burns, and long-term contamination of soil and groundwater. Children playing outside could be exposed without ever knowing it. Firefighters risked walking into chemical infernos. This is infiltration that is not only criminal, but also environmental, turning safe neighborhoods into hazardous zones. The scale of the operation was staggering. FBI and DEA reports show that the cartels integrated multiple layers, smuggling chemicals, running labs, laundering profits, and embedding operatives. This demonstrated that the U.S. is not just a destination for narcotics, but a battleground where production, distribution, and laundering happen on American soil. This undermines the idea that the threat is only outside. The case shows how deeply global networks have penetrated the U.S. The discovery forces a rethinking of what border security means when networks are already entrenched in cities. It highlights the need for stronger community-level surveillance, stricter regulation of chemical imports, and tighter oversight of local businesses that could be laundering fronts. Without international cooperation, American communities remain vulnerable. Community leaders and federal agencies have framed this Los Angeles operation as a critical reclaiming of local control from the grip of narcotics-fueled violence and corruption. For years, neighborhoods lived under the shadow of cartel influence. Fear became part of daily life. Residents spoke in whispers because speaking too loudly could mean retaliation. The cartels depended on this silence, but this operation tore it apart. Federal officials framed it as an existential strike, an effort to remove a cancer spreading inside the city. U.S. Attorney Adam Gordon compared cartel operatives to a malignant growth, describing how their violence spread like tumors. The message was clear. This was about reclaiming sovereignty over neighborhoods that cartels had poisoned for too long. The operation was different because of its scale and coordination. The Department of Justice, FBI, DEA, and ICE Homeland Security investigations moved as one, using the full weight of federal power. Arrest warrants were executed as part of a synchronized campaign. Financial seizures struck at the heart of the cartel's business fronts, gutting their ability to blend into legitimate commerce. Officials described the strategy as overwhelming force by design, hitting leaders, money pipelines, and distribution nodes all at once. The message was unmistakable. You cannot hide. The law is coming for every layer of the operation. Community leaders rallied around this operation because they understood the stakes. Cartel-driven narcotics were the reason parents buried children and shootings echoed at night. The crisis is not just numbers. It is funerals and hospital beds. DEA officials called the product deadly poison. The substances were designed to maximize profit while destroying lives. The operation was framed as a step toward healing those wounds and a reclaiming of power that had slipped away. Community leaders used powerful imagery to describe what was at stake. Public parks, once avoided after dark, streets where children couldn't safely ride bikes. The operation was about taking those spaces back, showing residents that their neighborhoods belonged to them, not to cartel-controlled zones. Cartels thrive on financial invisibility. They use restaurants, retail stores, and real estate to clean dirty money. The operation seized assets, froze accounts, and disrupted cash flow. This is why financial seizures were central to the mission. Choking off the money keeps cartels from bouncing back. It sends a deeper message. Your empire cannot sustain itself here. For Los Angeles, this meant exposing how deeply the cartel had embedded itself in the business fabric of the city. For citizens, it was proof that what looked like an ordinary storefront could, in fact, be a cartel hub. For cartel leaders, it was a devastating blow, a signal that their financial armor was no longer impenetrable. Every major agency reinforced the same theme: unity. The FBI called the operation a decisive pushback. The DEA stressed the mission's role in addressing a national crisis. ICE Homeland Security investigations highlighted the protection of communities from transnational criminal exploitation. This consistency of message was not accidental. Officials know that public perception is as critical as arrests. By framing the operation as a turning point, they aim to instill confidence in communities and erode the myth of cartel invincibility.
Before we get to that, I need your help. I'm trying to hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help. So I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe and help me out.
This is about reclaiming what was nearly lost: lives, neighborhoods, and trust. The public doesn't just see what was gained, they feel what was prevented. This emotional calculus magnifies the sense of urgency. The Los Angeles raid is a potential model for dismantling similar networks in other U.S. cities. It proved that dismantling entrenched cartel networks requires a blueprint that blends intelligence, financial targeting, community trust, and environmental awareness. The first pillar of this model is multi-agency collaboration. The FBI, DEA, Homeland Security, and LAPD aligned resources, intelligence, and manpower. This synergy eliminated blind spots, ensuring that while federal teams traced money laundering, local officers secured streets. Without collaboration, operations stall. With it, they hit every layer of the network at once, proving that only a united force can uproot systems embedded so deeply in American cities. The second pillar is intelligence-driven tactics. Cartels rely on invisibility, burying themselves inside ordinary urban life. What broke the cycle was intelligence. Insider cooperation from cartel members turned shadows into maps. Surveillance technology traced movements invisible to the naked eye. In one coordinated strike, operations that had hidden for years were exposed. This model reminds every law enforcement agency that raids are about precision, not numbers. Intelligence transforms chaos into clarity, and clarity dismantles the illusion of safety. The third pillar is targeting both production and finance. A mistake in the past was focusing on one layer. This raid hit both the narcotic labs and the financial machinery that sustained them. By collapsing cash flow alongside production, the operation destroyed the network's ability to regenerate. This is why the Los Angeles case resonates so strongly. It was about structural collapse. For sustainable dismantling, every artery must be severed: product, cash, logistics, and leadership. The raid executed that philosophy, making it a replicable model for other cities. The fourth pillar is community involvement. Operations like these cannot succeed without public trust. Residents are the eyes and ears that provide the first warnings. In Los Angeles, framing the raid as a mission to reclaim neighborhoods built public cooperation. The sense of reclaiming local control is essential because it ensures people see law enforcement as partners, not an occupying force. The Los Angeles raid demonstrated this perfectly. The fifth pillar is addressing environmental and public health dimensions. Clandestine labs poison environments. Toxic chemicals seep into soil, water, and air. Children grow up in neighborhoods quietly contaminated by criminal operations. What made this raid unique was how enforcement addressed these damages alongside criminal prosecution. By treating environmental and health hazards as inseparable from the crime, the operation expanded justice beyond arrests. This holistic approach is crucial. It proves that dismantling these networks is also about cleaning the hidden wounds they leave in communities. The Justice Department has underscored the significance of this model. Federal briefings highlighted the ability to charge leaders with narco-terrorism, raising the stakes of prosecution. Health experts point to the hazards of clandestine labs as a public health crisis. Intelligence analysts stress that insider cooperation was the key that unlocked networks hidden for years. The alignment of these perspectives shows why this raid is more than local news. It is national strategy in action. This is not just about Los Angeles. It is about the idea of security in every major city. Cartels thrive on the belief that they can plant themselves anywhere and remain invisible. This raid broke that belief. For residents of other cities, the lesson is direct. These networks can be found, exposed, and eradicated. Understanding this raid is an act of civic awareness. It places the audience on the side of resilience, informed vigilance, and community defense. To know how this blueprint works is to refuse helplessness. The urgency cannot be overstated. Cartels adapt fast. Every delay gives them time to mutate, decentralize, and entrench deeper. The Los Angeles raid shows what speed, precision, and unity can achieve, but the model only works if replicated quickly. The window of advantage is narrow. Cities must act now, using this blueprint before networks evolve into harder targets. That urgency is the difference between communities reclaimed and communities lost. The Los Angeles raid is a turning point. It showed that cartels are not invisible, not invincible, and not immune to the combined weight of American law enforcement. It proved that hitting both labs and finances fractures their backbone. It proved that insider intelligence shatters secrecy. It proved that communities rally when they see operations framed as reclamation, not occupation. And it proved that healing must include cleaning the toxic scars left behind. This is the model, the roadmap, and the blueprint for dismantling embedded cartel networks in any city where they try to hide. The raid was not just about Los Angeles. It was about setting a clear standard. Intelligence, unity, finance disruption, community partnership, and holistic justice. That is how you dismantle not just operations, but the belief that cartels can ever claim American cities as their own. Law enforcement seized massive financial evidence that maps out the full scale of the urban cartel operation in Los Angeles. The image is unforgettable. Filing boxes stuffed with cash, safes crammed with bundles of bills, and a condominium hiding $35 million in currency. This is not a movie scene. It is Los Angeles, where law enforcement uncovered one of the most staggering cartel-linked financial operations in U.S. history. More than $65 million was mapped and seized, pulling back the curtain on how deeply cartel money has infiltrated the city's economy. The hook is not the dollar amount alone. It is the way that money moved. Authorities revealed a laundering machine disguised as legitimate commerce, centered in the fashion district of downtown LA. Businesses that looked ordinary from the outside were in reality money funnels, pushing narcotic profits through the black market peso exchange, a scheme designed to make dirty money look clean. The strategy was elegant in its criminal logic. Convert illicit US dollars into legitimate goods, sell those goods in Mexico for pesos, and return the value to cartel leaders with no obvious trail. These were not obscure shell companies in offshore havens. They were urban storefronts, warehouses, and condominiums in the same neighborhoods where people shop, work, and live. The very streets of Los Angeles were unknowingly hosting the arteries of a cartel's financial system. When duffel bags full of cash were carried into businesses, they were not just funding narcotics operations, they were poisoning the integrity of an entire city's economy. The seizures highlighted the dual nature of cartel infiltration. On one side was money, hidden cash, and records tracing flows across dozens of companies. On the other side was chemistry, clandestine labs in Los Angeles neighborhoods producing narcotics with volatile chemicals. These labs were ticking time bombs, releasing toxic fumes into the air, seeping chemical waste into the ground, and threatening explosions. Children in these neighborhoods were exposed to toxins that scarred their lungs and burned their skin. The evidence made it clear the financial empire was inseparable from the physical dangers inflicted on communities. Without this intervention, the cartel network would have continued to grow unchecked, laundering billions and endangering thousands. The bust prevented a nightmare that was already in progress. Authorities validated every detail. The FBI documented the interconnected businesses and their laundering schemes. ICE and the Justice Department announced charges against defendants who now face decades in prison. The CDC, DOJ, and academic research confirmed the dangers of clandestine labs. These were not exaggerations. They were cited facts, confirmed by agencies tasked with both law enforcement and public health. For residents of Los Angeles, this was not just about narcotics trafficking in faraway places. It was about their own neighborhoods serving as epicenters for cartel finance. For broader U.S. audiences, this showed that the state will not allow its urban centers to be hijacked by criminal economies. The urgency is unmistakable. The bust is framed as a beginning, not an end. Officials repeatedly warn that cartels adapt fast, shifting money routes and opening new labs as old ones are closed. The story carries a countdown quality. Every day without vigilance is another day that millions could be laundered, another day that toxins could leak into a neighborhood. The narrative flow accelerates when you consider how the laundering worked. Couriers carried cash in duffel bags through city streets. Businesses pretended to sell fabric or electronics while actually moving cartel money. Bank deposits were split and structured to avoid reporting requirements. Each piece of the puzzle made sense only when viewed together. And that is what the seized financial evidence achieved. The exposure itself is a weapon. because cartels thrive on invisibility. Once dragged into light, their schemes unravel. The emotional arc deepens when you see the human cost. Residents were exposed to chemical waste. Children struggled with asthma and irritation caused by nearby labs. These are not abstract harms. They are physical scars on communities. The cartel did not just launder money in Los Angeles, it left toxins in its wake, carving health damage into the lives of ordinary people. The busts signal to residents that their neighborhoods belong to them, not to shadow networks. Closure arrives in Humiliation for the cartels. The sight of $35 million in cash stacked inside a condo, the headlines declaring Los Angeles a cartel epicenter, and the defendants facing 30-year prison terms form a narrative of exposure. What cartels wanted hidden has been forced into daylight, and daylight erodes their power. The financial seizures represent more than money lost. They represent credibility destroyed. The networks were not invincible. They were mapped, rated, and dismantled. The final truth is unsettling but clarifying. Los Angeles was not just a backdrop to cartel activity, it was a hub. The businesses were not innocent. Many were complicit laundering fronts. And the homes that hid cash were symbols of a deeper rot, where criminal capital lived alongside ordinary families. By seizing the financial evidence and exposing the labs, law enforcement revealed the scale of an urban cartel operation that had embedded itself in one of America's largest cities. The exposure was not just about arresting criminals, it was about reclaiming trust in the idea that cities can resist criminal capture. It was betrayal that cracked the shield of untouchability. Cartel leaders who once believed themselves immune to capture were undone not by overwhelming force, but by treachery from within. The Los Angeles operation showed how fragile the illusion of cartel invincibility really was. For the first time in decades, top leaders were deceived, lured, and humiliated. The most shocking moment came when Joaquin Guzman Lopez, son of the infamous El Chapo, turned against his own ally. Under the guise of a routine inspection of land, Guzman Lopez convinced Ismael El Mayo Zambada to board a private jet. Instead, the plane touched down in El Paso, Texas, where federal agents swarmed the aircraft. In an instant, one of the most elusive figures in cartel history was in custody, betrayed by the very man sitting across from him. Guzman Lopez's complicity was a masterstroke of deception, weaponizing cartel mistrust against itself and showing how deeply U.S. authorities had infiltrated these networks. This strategy struck at the core of cartel identity. For decades, leaders evaded capture through layers of loyalty, bodyguards, and bribes. But betrayal from within collapses every defense. Nothing can protect a leader who is delivered into enemy hands by a supposed brother. The humiliation deepened with the settings in which these men were captured. They were not cornered in jungle hideouts. They were plucked from suburban neighborhoods, caught while playing the role of respectable citizens. One leader had faked his own death years earlier, living quietly in California. His neighbors saw him as an ordinary man until a raid shattered the facade and revealed that a cartel executive had been hiding in plain sight. This exposure carried a brutal psychological weight. Cartel bosses prided themselves on being untouchable phantoms. Yet now, images of them being dragged from airplanes and suburban homes flashed across international news. Their cultivated aura of power dissolved into the spectacle of handcuffs and mugshots. These moments mattered not just legally, but symbolically. They showed the world that the myth of cartel invincibility could be punctured. The arrests also revealed the precision of U.S. strategy. Federal law enforcement used tactical deception and timing, not brute strength. The operation combined intelligence sharing, covert monitoring, and insider betrayal. It was not luck, but design, a campaign of pressure that left leaders with no safe refuge. Once in custody, the spectacle shifted from arrest to legal exposure. These men, once feared warlords, stood in U.S. courts. The federal indictments laid bare the architecture of their empires. Prosecutors detailed flows of money, overdose deaths, and violence tied to executive orders issued by these men. The trials became public dissections of the very machinery of cartel power. For viewers, the spectacle delivered both relief and astonishment. Relief that such men were no longer free, and astonishment that they could be undone by something as simple as misplaced trust. The betrayal itself reshaped perceptions inside cartel networks. Leaders who once commanded loyalty through fear now faced paranoia in their ranks. Who might betray them next? Betrayal does not just remove one leader, it destabilizes the entire chain of command. The humiliation mattered even more. Power in cartel culture is tied to reputation. To be captured while disguised as a suburban, nobody strips away that reputation. Followers lose faith, rivals seize opportunities, and the image of an untouchable kingpin is replaced with a man in a jumpsuit shuffling into federal court. Law enforcement officials celebrated the outcome as a rare but decisive blow. For communities battered by violence, it was proof that justice could reach the highest levels. For the cartels, it was a warning. No fortress of secrecy lasts forever. The operation's brilliance lay in its method. By exploiting betrayal, federal authorities did not just capture leaders, they fractured the psychology of cartel command. That seed of doubt is poison in an organization built on loyalty and fear. The operation underscored the adaptability of U.S. law enforcement. They focused on the weak points cartels cannot defend: human ego, rivalry, and greed. They waited for leaders to slip into ordinary lives or trust the wrong ally, then struck with surgical precision. The symbolic resonance of these arrests rippled far beyond courtrooms. It was a message that even in the heart of American cities, no hiding place is truly safe. It was proof that betrayal can be a weapon stronger than bullets. The arrests delivered humiliation, fractured loyalties, and exposed the fragility of cartel leadership. These men were not captured in battles of firepower. They were undone by deception, betrayal, and the relentless patience of coordinated law enforcement. Law enforcement found industrial-scale narcotics labs run by Mexican cartels operating in plain sight inside Los Angeles neighborhoods. When they raided these facilities, they found sprawling laboratories designed for mass production. These were not small-time dealing operations. Agents reported setups with beakers, flasks, commercial heating mantles, vacuum pumps, and industrial-grade solvents. These were chemical factories disguised as homes. Warehouses were also converted, sometimes producing hundreds of pounds of narcotics at once. The sheer volume shocked investigators. The output was not just for local sale. It was built to flood entire states. The supply was calculated, not random. Precursor chemicals were flown from Asia straight into Los Angeles, turning the city into a gateway for synthetic narcotics. With those raw materials, cartel chemists could churn out endless quantities, making the supply line virtually unlimited. The production left behind toxic chemical waste, including freon, ether, and drain cleaners. This waste was not disposed of safely. It was dumped into drains, alleys, and backyards. This means children, families, and workers were exposed to hazardous fumes and flammable chemicals without knowing. The labs were not just criminal, they were environmental disasters hidden inside communities. Every raid revealed the same assets: firearms, stockpiles of cash, and cartel operatives managing the flow of money and weapons. These were not amateur cooks. These were well-financed, militarized organizations turning suburban Los Angeles into a staging ground. The cash fueled bribery and corruption. The guns ensured silence and compliance. What ties it all together is the organizational backbone. Investigators confirmed the direct involvement of Mexican cartel groups managing these operations for maximum profit. This was not freelance crime. It was part of a multinational empire. To staff the labs, cartels recruited labor from Mexico, training workers to operate mobile production setups that could be moved at a moment's notice. That mobility meant if one lab was seized, another was already being prepared elsewhere. It was a game of whack-a-mole played at an industrial scale. The DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment warned that Los Angeles had become a primary hub for cartel narcotics production and trafficking. These were not conspiracy theories. They were government-verified, on-the-record findings. Think about what would have happened if these raids had not taken place. The labs would still be running, counterfeit pills would still be hitting the streets, and toxic waste would still be dumped into drains. Every lab left standing means another surge in overdoses, another fire hazard, and another community at risk. That is what was nearly lost, and that is why this bust matters. The danger is immediate. Toxic waste doesn't wait, and cartel recruitment doesn't wait. Every day a lab is left undiscovered is another day a family breathes toxic air, and another day armed cartel members operate with impunity inside U.S. neighborhoods. This is not tomorrow's problem. It is today's. When law enforcement opened the doors of those labs, they didn't just seize narcotics. They seized a picture of what Los Angeles had become, a battlefield disguised as a city. Behind suburban facades, there were furnaces and pumps. Behind stacks of cash, there were cartel bosses pulling strings from across borders. These were not labs. They were weapons factories, churning out narcotics that destabilize communities, endanger public health, and empower violent organizations. The discovery of cartel labs in Los Angeles neighborhoods is a wake-up call. It shows that this crisis is not confined to distant borders, it is embedded in American cities. The payoff is this realization: vigilance is survival. Law enforcement can raid labs, but awareness and information are what prevent them from reappearing. Every time a narcotics lab is hidden behind a family home, it proves one thing: the battle is already here. These clandestine labs are often tucked inside rental houses, garages, or small commercial properties. Operators work with volatile chemicals like ammonia, ether, and freon, substances that should only be handled in controlled industrial environments. Instead, they are mixed in kitchen sinks or crude glassware without ventilation or safety systems. What emerges is not just an illicit narcotic, but a cloud of airborne toxins that seep into drywall, furniture, and nearby homes. When neighbors report strange odors, it is often too late. Vapors have already penetrated surrounding areas, leaving residents unknowingly exposed to invisible contaminants. Every batch produced leaves behind gallons of toxic byproducts. Waste is poured into sinks, storm drains, or backyards. The soil absorbs it, and water supplies become vulnerable. The danger doesn't disappear when the lab is seized. Contamination clings to surfaces. Even months later, children playing on the floor of a cleaned property may still inhale chemical residues or absorb toxins through skin contact. For cleanup workers and law enforcement, protective suits and respirators are mandatory, but families moving into these homes rarely receive the same protection. Exposure begins subtly. Residents might experience persistent headaches or eye irritation. Children, with their developing lungs, face the highest risk. Prolonged exposure can escalate into respiratory failure or neurological damage. The CDC documented cases where people exposed to these environments suffered long-term health complications. Firefighters responding to lab explosions often require hospitalization for chemical burns or lung damage. For communities, the cost is cumulative. Every lab adds to the silent epidemic of toxic exposure in Los Angeles. These labs are powder kegs. Flammable chemicals sit in poorly ventilated rooms, and one spark can trigger an explosion. Los Angeles firefighters have documented multiple instances where houses were reduced to rubble in seconds. First responders entering these sites face dual threats: immediate explosions and invisible toxic clouds. Without specialized training and protective gear, stepping into a lab can be a death sentence. This risk extends to bystanders as well. Perhaps the most gut-wrenching consequence is the impact on children. When narcotic labs operate in residential neighborhoods, children are exposed daily to chemical residues. Toys, bedding, and clothing become contaminated. In some cases, children tested positive for toxic chemicals in their bloodstreams despite never stepping inside a lab room. This is not just criminal activity. It's child endangerment on a massive scale. Even after a lab is dismantled, the damage lingers. Soil remains toxic, plumbing is corroded, and structures become uninhabitable. The contamination persists like a ghost. haunting communities long after the criminals are gone. The problem is clear. Toxic narcotic labs don't just create illicit substances, they create chemical disaster zones. They poison residents, endanger children, and devastate the environment. Every unaddressed lab is a time bomb waiting to harm innocent people. The solution requires aggressive interdiction, stronger environmental safety standards, and public awareness. The Department of Justice highlighted that lab explosions in California have killed or severely injured operators, neighbors, and first responders. Research in the National Library of Medicine described contamination levels so severe that standard cleaning methods were ineffective, requiring demolition of contaminated structures. These authoritative sources confirm one unshakable truth: narcotic labs are environmental and public health catastrophes. This is not a Los Angeles problem. Any community can become a target for clandestine labs. By understanding the risks, viewers recognize the stakes, their own neighborhoods, families, and health. To ignore the issue is to gamble with lives. To engage with it is to align with the values of safety, health, and community protection. This is not someone else's crisis. It is everyone's responsibility to be aware. The urgency cannot be overstated. Every day a lab operates is another day toxins seep into the soil and chemicals evaporate into shared air. The longer these labs remain hidden, the greater the cumulative damage. The lesson is stark. Cartel-operated narcotic labs are not just factories of addiction, they are factories of poison. They contaminate air, soil, and homes. They harm children, neighbors, and first responders. They leave scars that persist long after the criminals are gone. When law enforcement seizes a lab, they are not just fighting crime. They are protecting communities from invisible toxins that could haunt them for generations. The real battle is not only against narcotics, but against the toxic legacy these labs leave behind. These labs are more than crime scenes. They are chemical weapon sites hidden in plain sight. This takedown was just the start. The fight isn't finished. On your screen is the next video. Click the video, it opens right away, and you'll see the cartels crushed even harder.